Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I'm so glad you're here. Today I've got a very strange story for you. A story about buried gold, stolen in a bank robbery, a devious and demented man, the woman he met while in prison, and the many victims taken at their hands. This is a story about a serial killer, something we talk about a lot here on Dark Hearts. But this is a serial killer I doubt many of you have heard of, the Ogre of Ardennes. This man was depraved and very dangerous, but there is a disturbing twist to this true crime story. The serial killer's wife was his accomplice. This case begins many years ago, but has a very recent and shocking update that has been all over the news in Europe. This is the story of Michel Fourniret and his wife, Monique Olivier, the serial killer and his wife. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our story begins in Auxerre, France, a small village of around 30,000 people back in 1987, which lies on the River Yonne, about 90 miles southeast of Paris. 17-year-old Isabelle Laville was walking home from school just as she did every day. Isabelle had no way of knowing that she was being stalked for days by a monster. Two monsters, actually. As Isabelle walks along the road home from school, a woman pulls up and asks her for directions. The woman asks Isabelle to get into the car with her so Isabelle can instruct her where to go. And being polite, Isabelle agrees. She had no idea that the woman seated next to her, the woman she was trying to help, had been watching her and waiting for this moment. As Isabelle rides and the woman drives, they come upon a man who was standing outside of his car. This man waves the vehicle down and tells the woman driving that his car has broken down, and the woman offers him a ride. So the man gets into the back seat of the car and the woman begins to drive with Isabelle in the passenger seat. Within seconds, the man pulls a piece of rope from beneath his coat and wrapped it around Isabelle's neck from behind and begins to pull on the rope. As Isabelle struggles to breathe, the man shoves a pill into her mouth. It is Rohypnol, the date drug. Isabelle has just been captured by a serial killer and his wife. This is Michel Fourniret. He was born in Sedan, France in April of 1942. His father was a metal worker and his mother was a homemaker. Michel was a quiet child who was known to be very intelligent. He played chess and listened to classical music. He was a bit of a social outcast because he was shy and he was smarter than most of the kids his age. Michel would later say part of the reason he was so shy is because he was being sexually abused by his own mother. There's something you need to know about Michel Fourniret that will be a recurring theme through this story. He was obsessed with virginity. Why? Because he claims that he lost his own virginity to his mother. Of course, this is very disturbing if true. The concept of virginity is an outdated one. It means different things to different people. But for Michel, it was his focus. He was furious that he was not allowed to have his first sexual experience with a young girl his own age. And the fact that he was abused, combined with the portrayal of women during the World War II era, when the Nazis took over his hometown of Sedan, created a very deep hatred for women in Michael's psyche. This was a very bitter and angry man. Michel had a desire to reclaim his virginity, something he viewed as stolen from him by his mother. As he grew, so did his obsession with girls he believed to be virgins. If he could not have his own virginity back, he was going to take it from others. In 1966, when Michel was 24 years old, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a young girl. He was sent to jail for a short period of time, and when he got out, he was even more violent and dangerous. For the next 20 years, Michel Fourniret took and assaulted young girls. The records here have been lost to time, but by 1984, he was in prison for sexually assaulting 5 young girls. This man should never have been let out of prison. Never. While Michel was in prison in the 1980s, he began writing to this woman, Monique Olivier, via a prison pen pal program. What could go wrong? Sure, let's give the dangerous sexual predator who hates women access to women on the outside. Nothing could possibly go wrong there. What was Michel writing to Monique about? His fantasies of raping and murdering virgins. What did Monique do? Report him to the prison authorities or the police? Let them know that this dangerous pervert was anything but rehabilitated? Oh no. Monique told Michel that when he got out of prison, she would help him fulfill those fantasies. But she had a condition. Monique would help Michel if he would kill her abusive husband. Yes, Monique wanted her husband murdered and told Michel she wanted him to do it. Michel never did kill Monique's first husband, but that was her request. Michel Fourniret was released from prison in 1987, and he and Monique began a relationship. Apparently, Monique had left her husband at that point. I mean, the guy is lucky to be alive. The same year Michel was released from prison, he and Monique took their first victim, Isabelle, using the ruse of the broken down car. After Isabelle was choked and drugged, she was taken to Michel and Monique's house in Saint-Cyr-les-Cologne, where she was assaulted and then strangled to death. Michel and Monique then drove Isabelle's body to Bussy-en-Othe, a tiny commune near their home, where they dumped Isabelle in an unused well. For 18 years, Isabelle's family would look for her. Her mother pled with police to do more, and they did look for Isabelle, but they could not find her. I cannot even imagine what this mother and other family members went through during that time, and it makes me sad and angry. Michel then decided to lay low for a while to see if he would be interviewed or arrested on Isabelle's disappearance. He was not, and as time passed, he became emboldened and wanted to take another victim. Well, it ended up he didn't have to, because one came to him. In March of 1988, 30-year-old Farida Hamish contacted Michel. Farida was the wife of a man named Jean-Pierre Helogarc, who had been in prison with Michel in 1984. Jean-Pierre was a bank robber who shared a cell with Michel. Farida was calling Michel because Jean-Pierre was still in prison and she needed help. With what? Digging up the gold ingots, which are gold bars, and gold coins that her husband had stolen when he was part of the Gang de Postiche, which means the hairpiece gang. This was a team of bank robbers that operated in Paris between 1981 and 1986. The members of the gangs wore fake mustaches and beards and wigs. When they entered the bank they were going to rob, and that resulted in their very uncool, unfortunate moniker, the hairpiece gang. Farida wanted to dig this money up, and she said she would pay Michel to help her. Jean-Pierre told his wife that he trusted Michel, and that turned out to be a big mistake. After Michel and Farida dug up the gold bars and coins, Farida gave Michael his payment, gold valued at 500,000 francs. That's about $80,000. Michel then went with Farida to her apartment and helped her hide the stash in the apartment. The following month, so that would be April of 1988, Michel and Monique contacted Farida and told her they had to speak with her. They lured her from her home and drove her to the woods outside Clairefontaine, a remote region in north-central France. There, Michel strangled Farida, and with Monique's help, they buried the body. Michel and Monique then drove back to Farida's apartment and broke in. They stole all of the gold bars and coins that had been stashed there. They took the money and bought a house in Donchéry. Farida Hamish's body has never been found. In August of the same year, Monique found out that she was pregnant. So keep in mind what happens next. This crime that happens next was committed with the help of a pregnant woman. It is so disturbing. Michel and Monique went to the grocery store, and there they saw 20-year-old Fabienne Leroy in the parking lot. Michel told Monique that he wanted to take this woman. So Monique pretended that she was sick and needed help. They approached Fabienne and asked if she would take them to the hospital because they didn't know the way. Fabienne got into the car with the couple, and Michel asked her to give him directions to a surgical center. Instead, Michel drove the trio to a forest near an old military camp. How they kept Fabienne quiet and in control, we do not know. Alone in the dark forest, Michel ordered Fabienne out of the car. He then demanded to, examine Fabienne to see if she was still a virgin. Fabienne would not allow this, so Michael her and then shot her in the chest, killing her. Now, I want to stop here for a second and ensure that we are very clear on something. Not all women have a hymen. Not all females are born with a hymen. That is a myth, and it's one that needs to die. Virginity testing is a practice that is now condemned by the World Health Organization as a human rights violation. Also, the hymen can be broken during non-sexual activity, so it means absolutely nothing. I just want to make sure that I clarify what nonsense this is. It is not the 1600s anymore. So can we please move on? I know I'm mostly preaching to the choir here. I know you guys are with me on this, but I gotta say what I gotta say. Months later, in January of 1989, Michel Fourniret was on a train when he met 21-year-old Jean-Marie Desramault. He began chatting with Jean-Marie. And this is so terrifying. People wonder why women don't want to talk to anyone. This is a woman being polite on a train ride. And for that, the train arrives in Charleville. Jean-Marie was staying at a convent there. Apparently, you can get church-sponsored housing in these areas. Michel somehow convinces this woman to stay in contact with him, and he goes home and tells Monique he has found their next victim. On March 18th, 1989, Michel and Monique invite Jean-Marie to their house in Flowing. They were using fake names at this point. Michel promised Jean-Marie that he would drive her home after they had dinner. Even before they arrived at the house for dinner, Michel asked Jean-Marie if she was a virgin, and she told him no, that she had a boyfriend. I would have been like, none of your business. Sometimes people are too polite. This sent Michel into a rage, as he had assumed that because Jean-Marie was staying at a convent, she would be a virgin. Michel attacked the woman, who fought back and even tried to escape, but Monique came running from the house and helped Michel gag and bind Jean-Marie with adhesive bandages. Michel then strangled her to death, and Monique helped him bury the body in the yard of their house. Jean-Marie was not found for 15 years, and her family was left to live the nightmare of not knowing what happened to their loved one. Michel and Monique are now married. Did the wedding take place in hell? Did Lucifer himself marry these two? They were married in July of 1989, and Monique gave birth to their child, a son. On the afternoon of December 20th, the couple drove with their baby across the French-Belgian border to stalk potential victims. There in Namur, they saw 12-year-old Elizabeth Brichet walking to a friend's house. Yes, you heard me right, 12 years old. The couple watched the child go inside her friend's house, and they waited. Elizabeth came out of her friend's home just before 7 o'clock and began the short walk to her house. She would never arrive. Michel and Monique flagged Elizabeth down and asked her to give them, you guessed it, directions to the doctor's office, because this time they said their son was sick and needed a doctor. Elizabeth got into the car, and these two monsters drove her back to their house in Flowing. Now, something happens next that I am not going to go into detail here. The girl was undressed and was washed because she was menstruating. What this child went through is something... If I really start to think about this, it will never leave me, so I am admittedly brushing over it. The next day, Michel tried to suffocate Elizabeth with a plastic bag, but that didn't work. And so he strangled her. Her body was buried in their yard next to that of Jean-Marie's. Over the next decade, people claimed to have seen Elizabeth in Belgium, and another serial killer was even questioned about her disappearance, but she would not be found for many years. Many experts believe that over the course of the next few years, there were more abductions and murders after this one. But one of the last confirmed murders took place in November of 1990. Michel and Monique drove to a shopping center in Rezé. They were in the area because they had a court date for a burglary they had committed. So they were just criminals. They weren't just serial killers. They were committing all kinds of crimes, and the police had them right under their noses, but they were not aware of just how dangerous they were. That day at the shopping center, the couple saw 13-year-old Natasha Denai, who was walking through the parking lot towards her home. She had been at the shopping center earlier with her mother. Her mother had forgotten her purse at the store, and she sent her daughter back to get it. Can you imagine the guilt that poor woman lived with? It is... Michel and Monique lured Natasha back to their van, once again asking for directions. The girl got into the van with the killers, trying to be polite to help them out. They drove her to a secluded area near the coast, and there, Michel stabbed Natasha twice in the chest and then strangled her. They left her body on a beach. Investigators would later find evidence of necrophilia. Oh, Lord. Natasha was found not long after her murder. 8 days after her body was found, a man named Jean Groy, a neighbor of Natasha's, was arrested because he drove a van matching the description of the van seen in the shopping center parking lot. When the police went to question Jean Groy, they found that he was hiding suspected members of the ETA, which is an armed Basque nationalist organization. This furthered suspicion as the police believed that Natasha had somehow found out that her neighbor was housing wanted criminals, and so he killed her. We know that is not what happened. While in prison awaiting trial, Jean Groy took his own life in his jail cell. So as far as I'm concerned, that's another victim to add to the list. That man would never have been imprisoned, accused as a murderer, if not for the acts of Michel and Monique. The couple then moves to Belgium in the early 1990s. On May 16, 2000, Michel lured 18-year-old Céline Saison to his van as she walked home from school. He drove her back to his home in Belgium, where she was assaulted and then strangled. He dumped her body in a forest nearby, and mushroom pickers discovered her skeleton a few months later. On May 5th, 2001, Michel drove back to Sudan, where he met 13-year-old Mananya Thumpong, who was from Thailand. Michel had given the girl a ride home from school a few weeks earlier after seeing her outside the town library. This guy's just like a trolling shark. Michel then asked Mananya if she wanted to come to his house and play with his son, and she said yes. There was no play date. Michel strangled Mananya and dumped her body in a forest. Her remains were found a year later, but they had been mostly eaten by animals. It just gets worse and worse, and it's about to get even more disturbing. In 2003, 9-year-old Estelle Mouzin was on her way home from school in Paris. I'm going to keep this one very simple. The same thing happened to this little girl. Cases like this, I have a really difficult time, but I feel it's important to keep these older cases alive in our memories and never forget them. We must always remember how dangerous some people are, and we must always remember that they are out there. And I also like to keep the victims' names alive so that they are not forgotten. I don't mean to breeze over what happened to Estelle. I can't handle it. Okay, finally something happens that alerts the police to the monsters living in their midst. In June of 2003, Michel and Monique are out trolling for victims when they approach a 13-year-old girl who manages to escape from them. The details on this are very sparse, as Europe protects the details and identities of victims, especially children, much better than we do here in America. But it is this failed kidnapping attempt that leads the police to the couple's door. The police take both Michel and Monique into custody, where they are interrogated for hours, but they refuse to admit to anything. The police don't have any evidence of murder, so they say they have to let the couple go. Am I on planet Earth? They tried to kidnap a 13-year-old girl. They attempted to kidnap a child. Why weren't they put in prison? I obviously do not understand the European justice system. I mean, that is apparent. But the more of these foreign cases I cover, the more frustrated I get. How do you have two people that tried to kidnap a child not be arrested? I'm not even stringing words together properly at this point. I don't even know what to say. We just see so much crime that is not punished in these foreign cases, at least not in the way it would be here in the States. And for me, yes, it's frustrating. A year passes. Lord knows what these two assholes did during that time. The police failed miserably, and that failure becomes even more apparent later on at trial. We're going to get into that. The cops never catch this guy. Monique turned him in. He was right under their noses, and they couldn't catch him. In 2004, Monique went to the police. She must have been angry at Michel for something, and she told an investigator that her husband had been killing multiple people since 1987, when he got out of prison. This results in Michel Fourniret's arrest. When he is taken into custody, knowing that his accomplice has turned on him and knows there is no way out of what he has done, he begins to confess. Michel Fourniret admitted that he killed 8 females and 1 male who has never been identified. 4 of the victims Michel identified had been discovered in France and in Belgium between 1988 and 2002. The others had not been found. Monique was arrested as well, and she and Michel were extradited back to France. While in custody there, they helped the police find the bodies of 3 of the 4 missing victims. This process took 2 years, which is also something I don't understand. It sounds like they were maybe holding information to get things they wanted. So if that's the case, you can't blame that on the cops. On March 27, 2008, Michel's trial began, but the information that came out there was just the first of a series of revelations. The first thing the public was disturbed to learn was that Michel and Monique had been under police surveillance between 1989 and 1990. They were suspected, and there are many people who feel that the police are criminally liable for not catching the killer couple then. If they were watching these two, even if they never actually saw them do anything illegal, why was there no follow-up? If you suspect 2 people are kidnapping and murdering kids, why on earth would you simply stop surveillance without any sort of continued action? This is a question that continues to this day and has very recently come up again. We're getting there. At his trial, Michel admits to 8 murders, those of Isabelle Laville, Farida Hamichet, Fabienne Leroy, Jean-Marie Desramalt, Elizabeth Brichet, Natasha Denai, Celine Saison, and Manana Thompong. Michel was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison, but that is far from the end of the story. In February of 2018, from prison, Michel Fourniret confessed to killing 2 additional victims in Auxerre. They were Marie-Angèle Domès, who was an 18-year-old woman with disabilities. She was murdered in July of 1988. He also admitted to killing 20-year-old Joanna Parrish, who was a British woman studying abroad in France. She was murdered in May of 1990. 2 more years go by, and in March of 2020, Michel admits to killing 9-year-old Estelle Mosin, who disappeared back in January of 2003. Neither Marie-Angèle Domès nor Estelle Mosin's bodies have ever been found, and like I said earlier, Farida Hamichet's body has not been found either. 2 French journalists begin to look into Michel Fourniret, and they discover a letter that Michel wrote to Monique while he was still in prison. In that letter, Michel indicates that he murdered a man named Robert Boulin, who was the former Minister for Labor in France. Robert Boulin was involved in a real estate scandal at the time he disappeared. Boulin vanished in October of 1979 after having lunch with his son. His body was found the next day in a pond in a forest. There was a bottle of barbiturates found near his car, and there were letters addressed to his wife and to his colleagues at the Labor Ministry. The death was ruled as self-inflicted, but Boulin's family never accepted that theory. Boulin's cheek had been fractured, and he was badly beaten. He drowned in less than 2 feet of water, and his lungs, which would have confirmed drowning, were stolen from the coroner's refrigerator. Now, this is a story all on its own, but there is suspicion that Michel Fourniret had something to do with this man's death. Journalists also uncovered evidence that points to Michel Fourniret being the killer of Marie Dolores Rambla, an 8-year-old who was murdered in June of 1974. A man named Christian Ranucci was tried and convicted for this murder, and he was one of the last people executed in France for this murder. Now, Michel Fourniret has denied being the killer, but we simply do not know, and there are many people that believe the wrong man was executed. More victims began to be uncovered, and the investigation continued. Michel Fourniret died in prison on May 10th, 2021, when he was 79 years old, but even his death is not the end of this story.
It's unclear how many unresolved crimes he took to his grave. Michel Fourniret confessed to the murders of 11 females, all teenagers and young women. In 2008, he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. His then-wife, Monique Olivier, was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years for complicity. 2 years ago, following hundreds of hours of interviews, Fourniret confessed to 4 other murders, one being that of Estelle Mouzin, who disappeared 18 years ago from Guermantes, a small town east of Paris. Detectives first considered Fourniret a suspect in the girl's disappearance in 2006 after they found a photo of her on his computer, but the lead wasn't followed up. Speaking after learning of the serial killer's death on Wednesday, Mouzin's father berated the French justice system for not bringing the truth to light sooner so that Fourniret could have gone to trial for the crime.
Cette mort, elle concrétise le gâchis de la justice dans le cadre du traitement de cette personne. Je pense qu'il y a 5 ou 6 ans, il fallait s'intéresser à son cas. Et le temps perdu ne peut jamais se rattraper. Et c'est de ce temps-là perdu dont nous souffrons aujourd'hui.
Seen here in the grey pullover and with long grey hair, Fourniret's ex-wife Monique Olivier helps investigators search for Estelle Mouzin's body in the Ardennes. It's now Olivier alone who will face justice for her complicity in 3 of the murders confessed to by Fourniret in 2019.
Les meurtres commis par le couple ont toujours été à 4 mains. Monique Olivier a encore toute sa tête. Aujourd'hui, les enquêteurs de la section de recherche de Dijon, la juge, sa greffière connaissent parfaitement le parcours de Michel Fourniret et Monique Olivier. On doit pouvoir résoudre d'autres affaires.
Michel Fourniret confessed to committing 2 murders a year, so many cases that they may never be resolved.
Just a year and a half ago, in November of 2023, Monique Olivier was charged with assisting in the murders of the 3 victims not addressed in the 2008 trial. Monique faced charges of aiding and abetting regarding the murders of Marie-Angèle Domais, Joanna Parrish, and Estelle Mouzin. Monique is now 76 or 77 years old and has been in prison for years, already convicted twice of aiding and abetting. She was given 20 additional years in a 2018 trial for the murder of Farida Hamish. In December of 2023, Monique Olivier was convicted on all counts, complicity to murder and kidnapping. She was sentenced to an additional life in prison term with a minimum of 20 years. At 76, 77 years old, she will never leave prison, and that is exactly as it should be. Roger Parrish, Joanna's father, told the media, "We've waited a long time. Her presence alone would have gained the confidence of all the victims who would never have believed a woman could have been part of such an appalling and depraved act." I completely agree. Monique told the court, quote, "I regret everything I did, and I ask for forgiveness from the families of the victims while knowing that it is unforgivable." So why ask for forgiveness, you piece of shit? To try and make yourself feel better? To give them something else to feel bad about? This woman is a waste of oxygen, and I hope her life in prison is miserable. I've seen some of the prisons in Europe, and they're like a boarding school. I'm just becoming bitchier and bitchier. The things that some of these people in these stories do, I used to tell this story. It was interesting to me. I like history. I like true crime. And the longer I've done this, I just have developed this real hatred for these people. I don't know if it's healthy, but there are parts of me that know I do my best work when I'm angry. I write my best songs when I'm angry. I paint my best paintings when I'm angry. Anger has always been a companion of mine. And maybe this is my mission, to use my anger to get these stories out and to make sure these victims are not forgotten. I want to send love from the Dark Hearts community to all of those affected by the acts of these terrible people. I also think about the couple's son and what this has been like for him, knowing that his parents were a duo of serial killers. Please know that the names of the victims that you loved will always be remembered, and we will never forget what happened to these innocent people so many years ago. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Would you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me? January was a really slow month, and you guys know I'm kind of on a ticking clock here. Spread the word about my channel, drop it in the comments of other channels if you would like to, and listen to my podcasts if you want. This one's called Dining with Death. This one is called Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. This is the current podcast. I post brand new episodes every Monday and every Wednesday, and you will hear some stories there that you don't hear on YouTube. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons. You guys' support, it means the world to me. You know, we've still got our fundraiser going. Watch this short video if you would like to donate a few dollars to possibly help us solve some cold crimes. I hope you're doing well, my friends. We're almost through February. We can see the end of the tunnel. Spring is around the corner. Hang in there. Stay safe and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.